Welcome to another episode of Secrets Recapped. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more content.
The world was plagued with a virus that turned people into zombies. A family of three, consisting of Andy, Kay, and Rosie, were living in a boat in rural Australia. Andy spotted two children playing on the riverbanks and called to them, but when the father of the children flashed a gun, they continued on their way. Andy and Kay were talking about their rations, and they were planning to head to a military base with their daughter Rosie. Later that day, Andy investigated a yacht wreckage. He carefully checked it out and took the food there. A noise alarmed him, which prompted him to leave. He showed Kay what he found and then lay down for a rest. While Andy was resting, Kay entered the wrecked yacht to check it out herself. Like Andy, she also heard the noise, so she tried to leave. But as she tried to, she was dragged back inside. Andy was awakened by Rosie's cries. He found Kay in the bathroom with a gruesome leg injury. Andy fetched a towel and Kay set a 48-hour timer on her watch. Andy told her that they need to leave right away, but Kay reassured him that she had no symptoms yet. Andy insisted that they need to get to the hospital to treat the heavy wounds. They maneuvered the boat, and after they landed, they walked through, passing a pile of burning bodies. Later, they passed a child named Thumi, who was drawing pictures while eating. Afterward, she left a drawing of a man with his head stuck in a hole in the ground. Thumi threw some food into a hole, and the sound of someone eating could be heard. Sometime later, Andy and Kay found a jeep and took it. While Andy's refueling, Kay touched a yellow substance on the car seat. She called Andy, and as he got in, a zombie man chased him, and they drove away as fast as they could. After driving for quite some time, they stopped to change Rosie's diaper. Kay said that she felt normal, but suddenly dropped to the ground, convulsing, with yellow bile oozing out of her mouth. Andy held her until she stopped convulsing. They continued on their journey. When Kay woke up, she told Andy and Rosie to go, but Andy refused to abandon her. He brought her back to the car. Sometime later, Andy avoided crashing into a zombie, but crashed the car and Andy passed out. When he woke up, Kay had a save written on her with her blood. A yellow substance was oozing from her eyes, nose, and mouth. Then Kay leaned over to bite Andy. He had been bitten by Kay. Then, Andy set a 48 timer on himself. He continued his journey on foot with his baby on his back. He sprayed Kay's cologne on Rosie to calm her down. Then, a zombie from earlier on the road appeared. Andy went to confront it, but Thumi stopped and told it to leave his dad alone. Then proceeded to cut her wrists and wipe the blood onto the trees to attract zombies. Later that evening, Andy arrived at the hospital, but it was abandoned. He saw a woman in the dark named Etta. He confessed that he only has 46 hours remaining. Etta looked at his wound and dressed it. She said that it may not help much, but it is best to hide his wound. She offered him to stay the night. Later that evening, he explored the abandoned hospital, but dropped on the floor convulsing and spitting out blood. The next morning, Andy woke with 32 hours remaining on his timer. Etta suggests that he should find Thumi and her family who will help him. Shortly after, Andy leaves the hospital and passes ruined buildings. While walking, he saw a man in military uniform with his head stuck in a hole. As he continued to walk, a zombified soldier followed them. Some time later, Andy saw a truck and tried to take it, but a man named Vic, who was trapped under a gas cylinder, stopped him and then shot the zombie who had been following Andy and Rosie. Vic warned Andy that more zombies would approach because they now heard the shot. Andy freed himself from the cylinder that had trapped him, and they escaped together. Vic took Andy and Rosie home and introduced them to his wife, Lorraine. He gave her a pearl necklace and told them that she'd help them get settled. Once Rosie was comfortable, Vic told Andy that they needed to go to work. The two of them drove out until they found a gang of zombies surrounding a cage. Vic gave Andy a rifle, and they started shooting the zombies. Andy sees Thumi imprisoned in one of the cages as bait and is questioning his decision. Vic stole the zombies' belongings and gathered as much as he could for later when things returned to normal. Vic spread blood and entrails around the cage and played loud music to attract more zombies. When they returned, Lorraine just finished washing Rosie's clothes as they had been stained with the yellow bile from Kay. Once Rosie was asleep, Andy touched his injured arm and started to think of ending his life. Lorraine found him and stopped him. He asked Lorraine to look after Rosie, but Lorraine revealed that Vic wasn't her husband, and that Vic left his real husband to die at the gas plant with everyone else. She assured him that she'll look after Rosie, but not here. Andy suggested taking them to the family they saw at the riverbank earlier. Suddenly, they were interrupted by Vic, who was suspecting that Andy was trying to steal Lorraine. Vic knocked Andy unconscious with his rifle and woke up in a cage chained with Thumi. He angrily rattled the cage and called for Vic. Thumi just sat there, frightened. Andy apologized to Thumi for what had happened the day before. Thumi told him that she wants the keys to the clever man's cage. Andy agreed, and although he doesn't fully understand what he means, the two managed to escape and return to Vic's place. They woke up Lorraine and Rosie and took a rifle and the truck. As they snuck out, Vic appeared and started shooting at them. Lorraine got in the way and was shot by Vic. The others escaped and Vic ran after them. Andy and Thumi returned to the cages and found that the clever man was already gone. He had been rescued by his own people earlier. Vic searched for them and the three hid in a cave. Vic demanded that Andy and Thumi return. After Vic left, Andy and Thumi managed to break free from the chains. Later that night, Thumi was woken up by Andy banging his face against the wall. Thumi embraces Rosie and Andy soon returns to normal. The next day, while on their journey, Thumi explained that the clever man is a magic man that can return a man's soul. Thumi thinks that this clever man can heal his father and maybe Andy as well. She walked away to go to a tree where her father has been imprisoned. He was already dead. She began to hit herself on the head repeatedly with a rock, but Thumi was angry. She told Andy that he knows nothing. Thumi blames herself, saying that she took too long. Andy told her that he needed to leave and wanted her to come with him, but Thumi told him that she doesn't care about him or his baby. He then left her. The watch signified that Andy had only 9 hours remaining. Suddenly, Andy fell and started clawing the ground. When he woke up, he saw Thumi holding Rosie. She guided him to the river where they had seen the family earlier. When they arrived, they cautiously entered the caravan. Andy sprayed perfume on Rosie to calm her down. Andy attends to Thumi's head wound, and Thumi says that when the wound on her head was healed, the wound in her heart would also heal. Sometime later, Andy started looking for the family, but when he found them, he noticed that the father had already been infected. The father planned to mercifully kill his family and offered Andy the remaining bullets. Thumi walked away hearing the gunshots behind them. While the three were resting, Thumi came close and said that she wanted to go home. Andy asked Thumi to look after Rosie if he didn't make it. As they continued on their journey, they passed through an area where zombies were feasting on a body. They walked through a tunnel and saw zombies holding their heads against the wall. Andy spotted Vic with his truck at the other side of the tunnel. He heard something and searched for it while Thumi climbed into the cab. Andy lined up with the other zombies and called out to Vic. Vic hit the zombies one by one. Before Vic could hit Andy on the head, Andy retaliated. Then they fought, and Vic shot Andy. Vic returned to his truck and threw out Thumi. Andy looked for Rosie and spotted her sitting with Vic a few feet away. Vic threatened to kill Rosie, but realized that he was dying anyway, and broke down in tears. Vic returned the baby. Nearby, Thumi was lying on the ground with a concussion. Andy helped her to get up, and she walked in a daze. Andy told her to stay focused. A little while later, they stopped because Andy began to lose control again. As Andy lifted his head, yellow bile was oozing from his face. He eyed rotting meat, but fought the urge to eat it. Also nearby, a group of Aborigines were performing a ceremony and killing all the zombies that came near. Andy couldn't take it anymore and collapsed. He took the meat out of his pocket and attached it to a stick. He said he'd soon be gone and told Thumi to look after Rosie. Andy bids goodbye to them. He put a mouthguard on and dug a hole and put his head in it. Sometime later, the Aborigines were fighting a horde of zombies. After slaughtering them all, they heard a whistle. They saw Thumi on Andy's back with Rosie, and she was using a piece of meat to lead them onward. The Aborigines held Andy back and took Thumi and Rosie to safety. The clever man proceeded to stab Andy, but before he could do so, Thumi stopped him. Thumi sprayed Kay's cologne first. She then held Andy's hand, and the clever man killed Andy. The sun set, and they walked back to the wilderness. There, they joined a group of survivors who greeted them happily. It was noticed that Andy wrote a thank you on Rosie's stomach.